Shabbos on lock, the way we daven on Shabbat. It's Friday night, we'll say the brachot. A cup of wine and a pair of Nerot. Loved ones are here and we're pulling them close.
Good and Erev Shabbos, my holy sisters and brothers. We're so excited. Shabbos is almost here. That was 613, the a cappella group, singing their song. I think it's just called Shabbos. How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we do some spectacular learning, 2 Mishnas, and really interesting stuff here on a Friday afternoon. Sharon in New Jersey, Yehudit saying Shabbat Shalom, Nina Salin, everyone wishing you a restful and rejuvenating Shabbos and an easy and meaningful fast. That fast begins tomorrow night as we enter Tisha B'Av, the saddest day of the calendar. We'll be reading Eicha, the book of Lamentations, on Saturday night. And here at Accidental Talmudist, Nina and I will be doing our annual reading of the Book of Lamentations in English at noon Pacific, live on Facebook. That's Sunday. Now, because of Tisha B'Av, we will not have AT Daily class tomorrow night, Saturday night. No class Saturday night. I am intending to do a double daf at 6 p.m. Pacific on Sunday. So I'll be toward the end of the fast. I'm sure I'll be weak. But hey, I'll have nothing better to do than to teach the class at 6 p.m. So hopefully I'll have enough energy to do it. That's the plan. 6 p.m. on Sunday, we'll do a double daf. Who else is with us today? Paula in Chicago, Rebecca in LA, James says Shabbat Shalom, John in Maine, Christo in Lubbock, Bill in Missouri, Paula in the Great Northwest, Renee in Indiana. Paula loves the tunes from 613. Maria with us from Bellingham, Washington. Paula says Shalom. And Lynn is with us from North Texas on the YouTube side. Today's class is dedicated by Linda Fuqua, and her dedication is lovely. She says, from the nations to our local Levi, who teaches us Torah, may you have a blessed day. Linda's referring to the fact that, I've mentioned it before, I am a Levi. My father, my grandfather, etc. We are descendants of Levi, the third son of Jacob, right? And so the Levites were entrusted in the Torah to do what is necessary for the temple. These days we have no temple, so the special duties of the Levite are in a traditional service. A Levite will usually take the second aliyah, saying the blessing on the second reading from the weekly Torah portion. And on days when the Kohanim, the descendants of Aaron, bless the congregation, before they do that, we the Levites wash their hands. Okay, a quick quote. Where'd it go? So, Nina and I are not Chabadniks, right? We have great love for the Chabad movement and for Chabad rabbis. That's a picture of the Lubavitcher Rebbe back there, the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe. Here's a little story about the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe. He's often called the Friedecker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe. And I'm reading a book right now, by the way, this fantastic book called The Secret of Chabad, which sort of talks about, what these Chabad rabbis are doing, going out all over the world, creating Chabad houses, essentially creating synagogues everywhere in the world. It's an astonishing accomplishment that's becoming more astonishing every day. The Rebbe, the 7th Rebbe said, we got to bring the Judaism to the people. I mean, most Hasidic movements, and there's quite a few Hasidic groups, right? You've heard of Chabad, that's one that most people have heard of, but there's also Satmar and Belz, and there's probably 30 different Hasidic dynasties. But most of them, what they're doing, they're all sort of in the, descendants, spiritual descendants of the Baal Shem Tov, who founded Hasidic Judaism. The idea of which was that God loves the prayers of all Jews, even simple Jews who didn't, merit to go and study Talmud in the great yeshivas in Vilna and other yeshiva centers in old Eastern Europe. But the Baal Shem Tov said that the prayers of the simple people is amazing, right? And God loves those prayers as well. It's not that the Hasidic movement was unlearned, quite the contrary. Hasidic Jews take learning very seriously, but there's also quite a bit of mysticism, Kabbalah, and really fervent and intense prayer, and usually a lifestyle. I mean, you identify the clothes of Hasidim. Some are even dressed in the kind of 17th century Polish noblemen, right? The high socks and the fur hats, the streimels, etc. But often characterized by a group that removes itself from the world so that they can guard themselves from outside influences and really keep the tradition going the way that they've inherited it. So for a Hasidic movement to take themselves out into the world and make themselves available to all Jews in the world so that no Jews should at least not have the opportunity to connect with Judaism, amazing. And they've done it in such a big and committed way. And also with the Noahide movement, I mean, just bringing the teachings of Torah to the whole world. Chabad.org is a website used, but believe me, not just by Jews. I mean, they put out so much content, the entire Bible, and so many other teachings and about holidays, etc. And lots of people using that resource, millions of monthly visitors at Chabad.org. At any rate, in this book that I'm reading, The Secret of Chabad, I learned that it wasn't just the seventh Rebbe who created that idea to take Judaism out to the Jews everywhere where they might be in the world. He actually, that effort was commenced by the previous Rebbe. So Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, it was his father-in-law, right? The Lubavitcher Rebbe, the seventh Rebbe, his wife Chaya Mushka, it was her father who was the sixth Rebbe. And he, when he lived in Russia and the Soviet Union made it illegal for Jews to learn Torah, he set up a network of underground schools so that Jews could keep learning Torah. And he never stopped making Torah accessible, not just to the followers of Lubavitch, the Chabadniks, but to all Jews out there. So he really started that. And then the next Rebbe, the seventh Rebbe, the last Rebbe, really just took it to a whole other level exponentially. But here's a story about the previous Rebbe. In 1941, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak Schneerson, instituted a program that provided Jewish children from New York City public schools with an hour of weekly Jewish study. The previous Rebbe had been imprisoned in Russia. Eventually, he made his way to America in 1940, right? 1940. By 1941, he's already establishing these programs to reach Jewish children in the public schools. Every Wednesday afternoon, student volunteers from the Lubavitch Yeshiva would interrupt their studies for several hours, travel to New York City's public schools, bring their charges to local synagogues, teach them about their traditions, and then escort them back to their respective schools. One studious young man wrote to the Rebbe asking to be excused from participating in the program, as he felt that he was wasting his time. First, he wrote, he didn't think that he actually achieved very much. Every week he recited prayers with the children, but he didn't believe that the prayer sessions had any lasting effect. Second, it took 3 or 4 hours out of his day to travel to the school assigned to him, pick up the children, take them to a local synagogue, teach them, drop them off, and then return to the yeshiva where he wanted to be learning full time. And he felt that his time would be better spent furthering his studies. And the Rebbe replied, I want you to know that on Wednesday afternoons, all of the souls in Gan Eden, in paradise, including Moses himself, envy you for the unique opportunity that you have each week to say Shema Yisrael and recite a blessing with a Jewish child. The souls in Gan Eden no longer have the opportunity to interact with Jewish children and bring them closer to their Father in heaven. Do you know what they would give for the privilege that you have? How beautiful. Sadly, we still live in a time. Chabad has made a dent in it. There was a recent study that says that 34% of the Jews in the world, all Jews in the world, have had some kind of interaction with Chabad. So it's an incredible thing. I mean, there's over 5,000 Chabad houses all around the world. They've done a lot. Still, some huge percentage of Jews in the world are completely disconnected from Torah and from Judaism. So obviously we're doing what we can here at Accidental Talmudist. We're a nonprofit organization. When you support us, you participate in that effort of getting Torah out there to all people in the world, and particularly to help Jews connect with Torah. But also, if you are privileged to have a connection with Torah, if you have Shabbos dinners, if you have a Shabbos table, and you know some Jew who doesn't have Shabbos in his life and who's never been to a Shabbos dinner or won't be at a Shabbos dinner unless you invite them to your Shabbos table, do it. Okay. We are holding on Daf Tes, page 9 here in Tractate Sukkah. This is the 7th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of Sukkot. We're in chapter 1. Now beginning our discussion of the second Mishnah here in chapter 1, and we'll actually open our discussion of the third Mishnah as well today. Chapter 1 of 5 chapters. This chapter is all about the requirements of the Sukkah itself so that we can fulfill the commandment in the Torah that during the festival of Sukkot, you shall dwell in sukkahs, right? You shall dwell in a sukkah, you, plural, all the people, all the Jews shall dwell in sukkahs. Mishnah number 2. With regard to an old sukkah, Beis Shammai, the followers of Shammai, deem it unfit for the mitzvah of sukkah, and Beis Hillel deem it fit. And which is considered an old sukkah? It is any booth that one established 30 days or more prior to the festival without expressly designating that it was for the mitzvah of sukkah. In that case, the assumption is that he constructed it for some other purpose. However, if he established it expressly for the sake of the festival of Sukkot, even if he constructed it at the beginning of the previous year, it is fit for use in the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Sukkah, even according to Beis Shammai. Now, it makes sense that we follow most laws where there's a dispute between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, we follow Beis Hillel. And it would have to be because what we were learning yesterday about these structures that were built for other purposes, right? Like those shepherds' huts or those huts for guards guarding the crops in the field that were not built to be a sukkah. We learned yesterday that they could be turned into a sukkah as long as they had the proper roofing above them. So since they weren't built originally for the mitzvah of sukkah, how is it that they could be fit? It must be that the majority opinion, which in this case is Beis Hillel, would use such a structure. Now we're talking about an old sukkah, right? So if it was just built, who knows what it was built for? And more than 30 days before the festival, so we would assume it wasn't built to be a sukkah. But if it was built to be a sukkah, then it doesn't matter when you built it, it's going to be fit for the purpose of sukkah during Sukkot. Okay, now the Gemara. What is the rationale for the opinion of Beis Shammai? So now we're going to be examining the minority opinion, Beis Shammai. The Gemara explains that it is, as the verse states, the festival of Sukkot is 7 days unto the Lord, indicating that we require a sukkah established for the sake of the festival. A sukkah not constructed expressly for the festival is unfit. And so even if, according to Beis Hillel, it could be deemed fit, like you're in a jam, you need a sukkah, okay, you built it for something else, but it's going to satisfy the requirements of a sukkah. It's taller than the minimum height. It's going to be shorter than the maximum height. You're going to put the proper roofing on it. It's got at least 2 walls plus a handbreadth minimum width of the third wall. okay, you can use it. But Beis Shammai is saying, look, much better that you're going to use a structure that you built for the purpose of fulfilling the obligation to dwell in a sukkah. The more intentionality you bring to fulfilling any mitzvah, the better. And the Gemara asks, and how do Beis Hillel interpret this verse? Right. So according to Beis Shammai, Leviticus 23:34, the festival of Sukkot is 7 days unto the Lord, right? Meaning you're going to be dedicating yourself to fulfilling a mitzvah that the Lord commanded you to fulfill. And in this case, it means that you built the sukkah for the purpose of fulfilling that obligation. Okay, so the Gemara asks, how do Beis Hillel, who would deem a structure that you didn't build for the purpose of sukkahs, but that happens to fulfill its requirements, that it would be fit for the sukkah, what is Beis Hillel going to do with that verse? And the Gemara answers, in Beis Hillel's opinion, that verse is necessary to teach in accordance with the statement of Rav Sheshes. As Rav Sheshes said in the name of Rabbi Akiva, from where is it derived that the use of the wood of the sukkah is prohibited for any purpose other than for the sukkah all 7 days of the festival, and it is designated exclusively for the mitzvah? It is derived, as the verse states, the festival of Sukkot is 7 days unto the Lord. So here what we're learning is, okay, now you create a sukkah, you've built the sukkah, or you rededicated a building that was built for something else into your sukkah. Okay, now that's your sukkah. And the wood from which that building is made, whether it's for the walls or the roof, is now consecrated to God. It can only be used for the mitzvah of Sukkot. Let me read that halacha. It is prohibited to derive benefit from the wood of the sukkah for the duration of the entire festival of Sukkot. And this applies to both the walls and the roofing. It is even prohibited to remove a splinter for use as a toothpick. And this ruling is in accordance with the ruling of Rav Sheshes in the name of Rabbi Akiva. Right? So just like if you consecrated an animal to be brought as an offering when the temple is standing, now you can't do anything else with that animal. You can't work it. It has to be used as an offering, or if you dedicated money to be donated to the temple, right? Or even today, if you dedicated money to be donated to charity, so that's consecrated. You can't then take that money and go use it for something else. And likewise, the wood of the sukkah now is dedicated to sukkahs, and you can't use that wood for firewood or even for a toothpick as long as the festival lasts. With regard to this old sukkah, where does the conversation end up? Here's the halacha. A sukkah constructed more than 30 days prior to the festival of Sukkot is fit, provided that one introduces a minor modification with the festival in mind. And this modification can cover just a square handbreadth in one place, or any measure stretching across the length of the sukkah. If one established the sukkah specifically for the festival, it is fit even if it was established a year earlier, in accordance with the opinion of Beis Hillel in the Mishna and the ruling in the Jerusalem Talmud, which requires the modification. So if you built it for the purpose of the sukkah, it's fine. If you built it to be something else and it happens to satisfy all the requirements of a sukkah, you still have to make some small modification in deference to the festival. According to most authorities, the modification is added in the roofing. Even a sukkah established specifically for the festival, one should introduce a modification to make it clear that the sukkah is indeed for the sake of the mitzvah. Even though you built it a long time ago, for the sake of Sukkot, now that Sukkot is here, you should make some little modification to it, and that gets you involved in the mitzvah all the more, so that you're more mindful in fulfilling this obligation. That's where the halacha ended up. Let's continue reading our Gemara. And it is taught in a baraisa, in explanation, that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, just as the name of heaven takes effect upon the festival peace offering, so too the name of heaven takes effect upon the sukkah. As it is stated, the festival of Sukkot is 7 days unto the Lord. Just as the festival peace offering is consecrated to the Lord, so too the Sukkah is consecrated to the Lord. And the Gemara asks, but don't Beis Shammai require the verse to derive this halacha as well? And the Gemara answers, yes, indeed it is so, that Beis Shammai derives the sanctity of the wood of the Sukkah from this verse. But if Beis Shammai derived that you can't use the wood of the Sukkah, neither from its walls nor for its ceiling, for anything else other than the mitzvah of Sukkahs, then from where does Beis Shammai derive their other ruling that an old Sukkah is unfit to be used now for Sukkahs, as the Sukkah that was built more than 30 days before the festival? According to this minority opinion, Beis Shammai. Now they must have a different verse to support that ruling. Rather, what is the rationale for the opinion of Beis Shammai with regard to an old Sukkah? Another verse is written, Deuteronomy 16:13. You shall prepare for you the festival of Sukkot for 7 days, from which it is derived that we require a Sukkah must be established for the sake of the festival. So the Gemara asks, and how do Beis Hillel, which allow the old Sukkah to be used, how do they interpret this verse? And the Gemara answers, that verse is necessary to teach that one may establish a Sukkah even during the intermediate days of the festival. If one failed to construct a Sukkah prior to the onset of the festival, or if it collapsed during the festival, he may establish it during the intermediate days. Why the intermediate days? Why not as soon as the festival begins, or if your Sukkah collapsed as soon as it collapses? Because the first 2 days of Sukkot outside of Israel, or the first day in Israel, is a festival, and it has all the same laws as Shabbos with respect to building and construction. You can't do that. You can't build something on a festival or on Shabbos. A festival is just like Shabbos, except the one thing that's permitted on a festival that's not permitted on Shabbos is cooking, right? You can cook on the festival, but you can't build. So you would have to wait until it's neither the first festival day nor Shabbos, and then you could build a sukkah if you didn't already have one, or if the one you had built before the festival collapsed. So you'd wait till the intermediate days. But Beis Shammai don't allow that. And Gemara asks, and from where did Beis Shammai derive this halacha? They hold in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who said, one may not establish a sukkah during the intermediate days of the festival. Therefore, the requirement to build a sukkah for the sake of the mitzvah may be derived, for their purposes, from this verse. And the Gemara proceeds to clarify Beis Hillel's, the majority opinion. And do Beis Hillel not agree with the statement that Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav? As Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, if one fashioned ritual fringes, tzitzis, right, like I have here under my garment, if one fashioned tzitzis from hanging threads that remain protruding from the fabric like thorns after most of the superfluous threads were torn, and he tied them into ritual fringes, or if he tied fringes from the threads that hang down after sewing, or if he tied them from the fringes that hang from the bottom of a garment, the ritual fringes are unfit for fulfilling the mitzvah. Right? So the idea here is if you're just using leftover threads from other processes, so you can't make tzitzis out of that. The tzitzis are very, very holy objects. Right? We read in the paragraph, the 3 paragraphs of the Shema, right, morning and evening, and God spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say, you shall make fringes for yourself on the corners of your garments. You shall put a blue thread in the fringe, so that whenever you look at the fringe, you'll be reminded of all my commandments and to do them." Very important commandment. And so you can't just, I got some leftover threads, I'll turn them into fringes. This thing of the thorns, I read in a note, what that means is they used to use sort of like a thorn bush to comb out wool. And like the leavings that would get combed out, you couldn't use that like sort of like bundle of wool scraps and then weave that into threads to make tzitzis out of them. It's the same idea, just like Beis Shammai, you wouldn't want to take an old sukkah or some building you use for something else and turn it into a sukkah, Just like ideally, with the tzitzis, you wouldn't just have some threads lying around and turn them into tzitzis. When you set out to craft your tzitzis, that should be your intention from the beginning of the process. And Rav Yehuda related, when I stated this halacha, this law, in the name of Rav before Shmuel, he said to me, and there was a continuation. However, if the ritual fringes were tied from balls of thread that were not spun for the sake of the mitzvah, they are fit. So according to this first, was it a Baraisa or a Mishna? Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, right, that you can't use like these leavings, right, these just scrap threads left over from other things and turn them into tzitzis. But if you had a ball of proper thread that you had made and you didn't decide what that was going to be for, but it was, proper thread, and you could have used it, to weave something or to make clothing or a blanket or whatever you're going to make from it. So if that skein or that ball of thread or wool, so that you could turn into tzitzis. But Rav Yehuda said, when I stated this halakha in the name of Rav in front of Shmuel, Shmuel said to me, even ritual fringes tied from balls of thread are unfit, as we require the spinning of the thread to be for the sake of the mitzvah. Even the thread itself has to have been manufactured for the purpose of making tzitzis. And I believe that is the law. Ritual fringes must be spun specifically for the sake of the mitzvah in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel. That is the law. Where am I? Just as the threads for the ritual fringes must be spun for the sake of the mitzvah, here too, let us require a sukkah be established for the sake of the mitzvah. Perhaps we should reject any kind of building that was built for some other purpose, and then it could be turned into a sukkah in the same way that we wouldn't allow threads that were spun for some other purpose to be turned into tzitzis. And the Gemara answers, it is different there. As the verse states, Deuteronomy 22:12, you shall prepare for you fringes, tzitzis, from which it is derived for you, for the sake of your obligation. The fringes from the beginning of their production must be produced for the sake of the mitzvah. And the Gemara asks, so here too, with regard to the sukkah, the verse says, you shall prepare for you the festival of Sukkot. That's Deuteronomy 16:13. So shouldn't it be derived for you, for the sake of your obligation? Shouldn't we hold that just like the tzitzis, threads can only be used for tzitzis that were manufactured from the beginning for the purpose of tzitzis? And the verse says for you, and the verse about sukkahs and fulfilling the obligation to dwell in a sukkah during sukkahs, it says for you, and therefore a sukkah should only be fit if it was manufactured to be a sukkah from the beginning. That's the question. And the Gemara answers that this term for you is required to exclude the use of a stolen sukkah. So even though it was always manufactured to be a sukkah, it wasn't built to be anything other than a sukkah, if you steal it, you can't use that sukkah because you didn't build it for you to use it. Somebody else built it so that they could use it. I mean, obviously you would think a stolen sukkah would not be appropriate, but the fact is if it was stolen, and then maybe it was sold and an innocent person bought it, could he fulfill his obligation with it? And the answer is no. A stolen sukkah is going to be unfit, period. And the Gemara answers, for you is required to exclude the stolen sukkah. Establish the sukkah for you and do not use a sukkah belonging to another. And the Gemara asks, well, there too, with regard to ritual fringes, isn't the term for you required to exclude the use of stolen tzitzis, stolen ritual fringes? And the Gemara answers, well, there, with regard to the ritual fringes, there's another verse available, Numbers 15:38, and they shall make for them ritual fringes, from which it is derived for them of their own, and to exclude the use of stolen ritual fringes. Therefore, from the term for you, it may be derived that ritual fringes must be produced for the sake of the mitzvah, but since we don't have that additional verse available with respect to the sukkah, it is possible to repurpose a building that was built for something else and turn it into a sukkah as long as it fulfills all the requirements of a sukkah. And as we've seen, and you made some minor modification to it in deference to the festival. That concludes our discussion of the second Mishnah here in chapter 1. Now we do the third Mishnah. With regard to one who establishes his sukkah beneath a tree, it is as though he established it inside the house, and it is unfit. If one established one sukkah on top of another sukkah, the upper sukkah is fit, and the lower sukkah is unfit. Rabbi Yehuda says, if there are no residents in the upper sukkah, the lower sukkah is fit. That's the third Mishnah. Now we go into the Gemara. We're going to just start the discussion of this Mishnah. So I'm almost done. If you've got questions or comments, get them in now. Rava said, they taught this halacha that a sukkah beneath a tree is fit only with regard to a tree whose shade is greater than its sunlight, as the source of the shade in the sukkah is the tree and not the roofing. However, if its sunlight is greater than its shade, the sukkah is fit, as in that case, it is the roofing which provides the shade. So recall, the roofing of a sukkah, the schach, right? Its requirement is it has to provide more shade than light, and that is really the definitive attribute of the sukkah. It's roofing. It's going to be made from something natural. Sometimes they're rolled up mats of bamboo slats. Sometimes people just cut palm branches and kind of just stack them over the top of the roof. It still has to let some sunlight through, but provide more shade than light. If you build your sukkah under a tree, now you're going to be getting shade not only from the schach of the sukkah, but also from those branches that are up above. Right? And you cannot have that the roof of a sukkah is attached to a tree. They can't be living branches. They have to be dead branches. They have to have fallen or be cut from a tree in order to be fit roofing material, fit schach. So if you're under a tree, it would seem that now you've rendered, now the roofing of your sukkah is now what's providing the shade, and so that's going to render your sukkah unfit. But the qualification of that is, okay, but maybe a person does not have the opportunity to build his sukkah anywhere else but under a tree, and if that tree is pretty thin, right, a lot of light comes down through the branches of that tree. For example, if it was a dead tree, or imagine like a wintry tree. It's lost all its leaves. For whatever reason, it's not casting very much shade onto the sukkah at all. And in fact, it's the roofing of the sukkah itself that is creating more shade than the light which is passing through it. Then in that situation, the tree will not render the sukkah unfit. And the Gemara asks, from where does Rava reach this conclusion? And the Gemara answers, he learns this from the fact that the Mishnah teaches it is as though he established it inside the house. Why do I need the Mishnah to teach it is as though he established it inside the house? Let the Mishnah simply teach it is unfit. Rather, this is teaching us that in the context of this halacha, a tree is similar to a house. Just as with regard to a house, its shade is definitely greater than its sunlight, so too, with regard to a tree, it invalidates the sukkah only if its shade is greater than its sunlight. The Gemara asks, and even if the sunlight is greater than the shade of the tree, what of it? Why does Rava deem the sukkah beneath the tree fit in that case? Isn't there unfit roofing, meaning the uncut branches of the tree joining together with the fit roofing on the sukkah and rendering even the fit roofing on the sukkah unfit? And Rav Papa said this is referring to a case where one lowered the uncut branches and combined them with the fit roofing so that the branches still attached to the tree are inconspicuous. So given that the majority of the roofing is fit, the roofing in its entirety is fit. Now here we're in a very nuanced situation. If you're building a sukkah, go out of your way to make sure that the sukkah is not under a tree. That is very problematic, right? So there's going to be certain situations where being under a tree isn't going to mess it up, but it's very difficult to accomplish that. Here's where the law comes out. A sukkah beneath a tree whose shade is minimal. If a sukkah is established beneath a tree whose sunlight exceeds its shade, and the shade of the sukkah is greater than its sunlight, some are of the opinion that it is fit and nothing further is required. However, if the sunlight of the sukkah is greater than its shade, and it is only the shade provided by the tree that causes the shade in the sukkah to exceed the sunlight, one must lower the branches of the tree and interweave them with the fit roofing of the sukkah so that they will not be discernible. Others say that even if the sukkah is fit and its shade exceeds its sunlight, if the branches of the tree are directly above the fit roofing, they render the sukkah unfit. However, if one interwove the branches of the tree into the roofing of the sukkah is fit. In addition, if the branches are not directly above the fit roofing, the sukkah is fit, according to the Rima. And the halacha is in accordance with the latter stricter ruling, although in exigent circumstances, one may rely on the lenient opinion. Now, this is very problematic because they're saying that in order to make this work, you have to take the living branches of that tree and render them inconspicuous by interweaving them into the fit cut branches of the sukkah. But we already know you can't use a living tree as the shade of the sukkah, right? It certainly can't be that the majority of the shade of the sukkah is created by living uncut branches that are still attached to the tree. That for sure is going to be unfit. So it has to be that you have just a few living branches, they don't provide most of the shade, and you want to render them inconspicuous by interweaving them with the majority of the branches which are cut and fit. You know, you're in a very precarious legalistic situation that you want to avoid. You want to avoid that. Build your sukkah not under a tree, if at all possible. Okay, and the Gemara asks, if it is a case where he lowered the branches, what is the purpose of stating this halacha? Isn't it self-evident? And that you might have thought that means that you lower the branches, just like tie them to the tree. So now they're really out of the way. So why would you need to do anything else? But the Gemara answers that it is necessary lest you say, let us issue a decree and deem the roofing unfit in a case where one lowered them due to a case where one did not lower them. And therefore it teaches us that we do not issue such a decree. And finally, the Gemara asks that halacha too, we already learned in a Mishnah. If one trellised the grapevine, the gourd vine, or the ivy, climbing plants, over a sukkah while they are still attached to the ground, and he added the roofing on top of that, the sukkah is unfit, as roofing attached to the ground is unfit. But if the amount of the fit roofing was greater than the plants which are attached to the ground, or if he cut the climbing plants so that they were no longer attached to the ground, it is fit. So what you might do, and that would be, I guess, a very pretty sukkah, like if you had vines, even flowering vines, and you could kind of like interweave them in the walls or even in the ceiling of the sukkah, that could be very pretty, and it wouldn't render the sukkah unfit unless they were part, those vines, were necessary to complete that the majority, that the roofing creates more shade than sunlight. If in the absence of those vines, more sunlight than shade would get in, then this whole sukkah would be unfit because you can't use as part of the integral roofing of your sukkah something that is still attached to the ground or to a tree. Okay. That's what I've got today. Let's go to your comments and questions. Here on Sukkah Daf Test, page 9. Lynn, there is mention here that the sukkah must be one's own sukkah, made for the obligation to make a sukkah. We know that the lulav must be owned, but a neighbor's sukkah may be visited for the mitzvah. No, absolutely. Absolutely, right? That it should be your own and not stolen, right? That's what it said. You can't steal the sukkah, but with permission to go to your neighbor's sukkah and have a meal with him, of course you're fulfilling your obligation to dwell in the sukkah when you're visiting somebody else's sukkah. That could be the sukkah of a kosher restaurant. They often build sukkahs during Sukkahs. when you're visiting your friends, because we're visiting all the time and having guests over as well. I mean, absolutely, you're fulfilling your obligation in somebody else's sukkah when you're visiting for a meal. Sharon, can a non-Jew put up a sukkah for a Jew? Parentheses, a non-Jewish relative put up her sukkah when there was a recent death in the family and they could not do it. Well, absolutely. Right here, what you're talking about is that somebody's acting as your agent to help you build the sukkah. You built the sukkah, right? Like the fact that somebody helped you and that they weren't a Jew, I think is irrelevant. Of course, you can have, like workers come and help you with your sukkah, or friends come and help you build the sukkah. Here, all that really matters is that the sukkah was built for the purpose of sukkahs. But what we saw toward the end of the discussion of the first Mishnah is that even a sukkah, a building that was built by a non-Jew, obviously it wasn't built for the purpose of being a sukkah. They built it to be something else, but it would fulfill the requirements of Sukkot, would be fit to be a sukkah as long as it fulfilled those requirements. Probably they didn't, when they built their shed, they wouldn't have built it like with this, the kind of roofing requirements that we would have. So then you'd have to go in and put the schach on properly, get it roofed properly, and then the building would work, right? So, here also, certainly a non-Jew could help you. You could even use a non-Jew's building if you then modified it so that it would fulfill the requirements of the sukkah. So there you go. Bill, so notwithstanding that it's best practice to build the sukkah under a tree at all, but just for clarity, that it's best not to build a sukkah under a tree at all. But just for clarity, when we're talking about a tree whose shade is minimal, do we mean something like a conifer where there's a limited canopy and you are only getting shade at certain times of the day when the sun is behind it, or a palm where the amount of leaves itself is also sparse? Well, see, I think if you're talking about a conifer, I mean, just looking straight up from beneath some kind of, like a fir, a conifer tree, an evergreen tree, it provides more shade than light. So you don't want to be under that tree. If you're just in the shade of the tree at certain times of the day, you're not under it. You're in its shade, but you're not under that tree. So now it's a good question. Well, if that tree is providing shade, during several hours of the day, then when you're in the sukkah, is the sukkah somehow invalidated? And I would say the answer is no, because we already had that question, right? The sages pointed to that place, I think near Lod, where, if you're between these two tall mountains, and at that time we talked about what if you're between two skyscrapers, right? And you're like, the skyscrapers are casting a big shadow over you. In that situation, the sages say, okay, well, it's only because there's a mountain or a tree nearby that the sun is not reaching your sukkah. But you're not under the building, you're not under the tree. And so if the building wasn't there, we don't say that if you're under a tree, well, if the tree wasn't there, your roofing would be providing the shade that you need. They don't go that far. So under the tree is no good. Next to the tree seems to be okay, just like next to a mountain would be okay. But in terms of being underneath, there you need minimal shade from the tree, right? Like a palm tree, or a tree in winter that's lost all its leaves, a dead tree, something like that, where it's really casting very little shade. Okay, somebody asked, did you do a DNA test and it said you are a Levi? No. The reason I know that I'm a Levi is because my father was a Levi and his father was a Levi, and he heard from his father, like passed down. It actually is true that my father didn't hear from his father because my grandfather died tragically young, but my father heard it from his uncle, right? So the way that you know that you are a Levi or that you are a Cohen is because it's just been passed down, father to son, through all these generations. And then you said a Levi is not to drink fruits of the vine just to be ready for when Mashiach comes. No, I never heard that. We certainly drink wine. A Nazir is prohibited to drink wine. You're saying that we shouldn't be intoxicated because a Mashiach comes and the third temple goes up just like that. A Kohen has to be ready to serve, and a Levi has to be ready to be an assistant to the Kohen. I never heard, and therefore we can't drink. I know lots of Kohanim and lots of Leviim, and we definitely drink the fruits of the vine. So I never heard that teaching before. Maybe it exists, but I haven't heard that before. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Recall, no class tomorrow night because we're entering Tisha B'Av, but we will have a double page on Sunday toward the end of the fast for us. Maybe East Coast, you'll already be out of your fast. So at normal time, 6 p.m. Pacific on Sunday. For those observing the fast, may you have a meaningful fast. And to everybody, may you have a brilliant, beautiful, uplifting, rejuvenating Shabbos starting this evening. All the best.